Most players will never reach the level of 1400 in chess, not because they lack talent, they simply don't know how. I've been playing and teaching chess my entire life, and I can tell you that it basically comes down to only two major factors. It's reducing the quantity of blunders and improving your positional understanding. Of course, it's easier said than done, and that is why for today's video I've put together 10 most important tips that you gotta know to break through. How do you play in this position as black? It is black to play. Most players here would play pawn to d6, obtaining the title of a national master of Blunderville. Because, of course, it is tempting to win a tempo, kicking this knight back. However, white's got the move bishop b5 that turns things around, and now all these squares are controlled, black has no way out, and black is losing the game. They can try to cover, but after the trade, white is going to end up on top. Which brings us to the first rule. Keep an eye on opponent's pieces on your side of the board, because they are the real cause of all troubles. Your opponent can rarely attack you with those backward pieces, they're simply too far away from your position. But this knight is indeed dangerous. In the game, black lost because of this check, but not really the check itself, but rather the fact that there was this knight that controlled the square and did not allow black to easily cover. Therefore, instead, black should have played knight to g6, challenging this knight, but also keeping his position secure. But the bottom line is always keep an eye on these pieces and double check before making a move. Now let me show you this little fragment of the game and you will tell me what you think about this. If you see anything wrong here or not, like what do you think? Or is it just a normal chess position? Well, I mean, it's very common, a lot of players play like that or similar to that. But there's one thing that you can pay attention to right here. You can see that this bishop literally has no moves, literally no legal moves. And the irony of the situation is that black put handcuffs on his own bishop, and now the bishop is totally useless. Do not do that. So the rule states, do not turn your bishop into a tall pawn. Moving on to the next idea, here we have an interesting opening position. White noticed a tactical opportunity to play knight f6, which is a temporary sacrifice of the knight. Black obviously has to take it, but now white opens up the e-file and takes aim at black's king. In fact, black's position looks pretty dangerous. This knight is under the massive attack of all of white's pieces. However, black stayed cool and played rook g8, putting emphasis on his own counterattack. Now, how would he play here as white? At first, of course, it feels tempting to just take this knight somehow, but it's not that simple. You cannot easily take it with a rook because it's guarded by the other knight of black. How about instead capturing the knight this way? Looks like, okay, pretty cool, now the file is clear, the next turn we're gonna move the bishop away and start attacking, right? Not really, because black is preparing some counter-offense, and they have played knight e5, a brilliant idea. Counter-sacrifice of a knight to white's sacrifice of a knight, which opens up black's bishop, and together with the rook, together with this bishop, that is getting really dangerous for white, and in fact, black is winning the game. For example, if white were to capture the knight this way, black would sacrifice the rook, and within a couple of checks, finish the game. Which brings us to the next point. You gotta bring in the wild moves. And I gotta cover a quick story just to explain. I heard this story from a guy, he's a YouTuber and fitness influencer, but also a firefighter. And he shared the story that one day they were fighting a fire in a house, and the floor beneath him collapsed. He fell from the second floor to the first one. But luckily for him, he landed on a sofa. And despite soft landing, he was stunned, he couldn't move, couldn't speak, just sitting there on that couch trying to recover. And after a little while, the squad leader runs by and looks at that guy, sees there's a guy sitting there on a couch, just chilling, supposedly, right? And he starts to yell at him like, are you kidding me? Why are you just chilling here? And of course, ultimately that was everything good at the end of the story, but it gave us a nice term for our chess advancement. And I call it bringing that wild moose, that one piece that is sitting on a couch, just chilling, not taking part, while everyone else is trying hard to win the game. So you gotta bring in that final wild moose. And white played rook to d1. Black didn't get the point and said, okay, I'm gonna just continue with my plan, my attack, play queen takes f3. Now it looks like white is about to go down, but he sacrificed the rook first and then the queen to deliver one of the most beautiful combinations in chess history. Now the king has to take it, which leads to this double check, because it's a check from a bishop and from the rook, which means that a king must move. If it comes forward, there is this very interesting, unusual checkmate. And if instead, what he did in the game, the king comes back, then there's bishop d7. And regardless of whether the king moves here or here, it leads to this stunning two-bishop checkmate. The next tip supercharges your attacks. In this position, white played h4, aiming to move the knight forward and generate this attack on the king side. Black wanted to stop that and played f6, challenging the center and also controlling the square. But white nevertheless can play knight g5 and actually should play, because the idea is, despite this is a sacrifice of the knight, of course, black can take it, but that could help white open up the h-file for his rook. And here's the problem. At first, when you calculate variations like that, this position looks very tempting, because now you've got indeed this open file for your rook, you've got this bishop coming, maybe the queen can come into play, and it looks like, okay, maybe I'm about to win the game. But here's the problem. Now, black has some time, it is black to play. And if we start thinking from your opponent's perspective, there's quite a lot that he can do, right? He can maybe take this bishop, maybe he can take this pawn or this one, or block the diagonal for the bishop, and it is highly likely that one of these moves will be problematic for you. Here's the rule: attack with momentum. Every move should come with a threat. Instead of just recapturing this pawn on g5, white first played bishop takes h7, calling the king out, and now it's not just a recapture, it is also a discover check. Black has no time, they has to move the king back. And now it's a similar situation. At first you may think, okay, now I've got the file, right? I want to play queen h5 and finish it off, right? I'll have this battery and we'll finish the game somehow. You could play queen h5, but it's the same thing. Now it is black to play and he can do something. So let's take this back. Is there a way to make it more forcing? Once again, attack with momentum. White can sacrifice the rook, and after that, bring the queen in with a check. Now you play g6, locking the door so that the king cannot escape, and you actually win the game with queen h7 on the next move. By the way, if you want to know how to find and calculate those attacking moves easily in your own games, I've got a free masterclass about this. I'll drop a link down below, you can check it out later. Around the rating level of 1000, it's pretty common for people to play knight g5 in similar situations, attacking this pawn, and if black castles, white may even decide to trade off their two minor pieces for black's rook and pawn, because mathematically it seems to make sense. White is giving up 6 pawns worth of material, right, 2 minor pieces, and rook and a pawn is also 6 points of material. Therefore, that seems like an equal trade, plus white hopes to expose black's king. So that looks like a good outcome for white, right? Wrong. There's one major factor that white here overlooks. Minor pieces are extremely active early in the game, they're already actively involved, while rooks are usually heavy pieces which are much harder to activate quickly, and that gives black significant advantage right here, right now. And in fact, white's position is already lost. I'll show you one game real quick to illustrate the point. Black is striking in the center, bringing the bishop out. The bishop is supported by the knight. White cannot play f3 because that pawn is pinned by the other bishop. And you see how black easily takes over. Now the queen is attacked. White moved here, knight to d4 with a whole lot of threats. There's already no normal way for white to defend. He decided to bite the bullet and just take this pawn. But after checks, black keeps dancing around, chasing this queen, keep attacking, keep creating threats with every turn. And white is still having a very hard time to activate his rooks or any pieces at all. And after h3, black finished the game with a little combo. The next rule is very simple and helpful: fight pawn addiction. Here's what I mean. In this position of the French defense, I won countless games, I don't even remember how many, because of black who played queen to b6. It is in fact the most played move in this position. Black sees an opportunity to snatch a pawn and they're going for it, instead of developing their pieces. Here's what happens next. They waste time dancing around with the queen, while white completes their development already. Now white starts their own attack, and b5 threatens this fork. Black thinks, okay, I'm getting castle, but actually there's already no way back for black. And now there's this great gift sacrifice that wins the game with a knight check, and then the queen comes into play and black is defenseless. There's checkmate right here coming. On top of that, white can even play rook b1 and capture this queen on b2, but they don't even need to because there's this checkmate. That's just how sad things are for black, because they were seduced by this little pawn on b2 instead of developing their pieces. Next example, how would you play here as white? A lot of players would play something like knight to c3, and you may be wondering, like, Igor, how come this is a blunder? It's a good move, right? I'm developing a piece. Well, in itself, there's nothing wrong with it, but it misses out on an opportunity to win the game on the spot. Let's take this back. And the winning move is pawn d6, which follows the next rule: blockade pawns to hinder development. It was actually Nimzovich back in the day who figured it out, that blockading opponent's pawns make a ton of sense, because it's not really about the pawn. The thing is, By blockading the pawn, you blockade all these pieces that stand behind it. They now have a very hard time to be activated, and that just gives you total dominance. If you look at this position, black can hardly move at all, right? You can attack very easily however you like it, and black is totally paralyzed. Like on the next turn, it's not even easy for black to come up with any meaningful move. Like this bishop can't get out, the rook cannot get out, the queen cannot really move. I mean, it could move to the e file, but we'll chase it away. And like that is it. This knight is pinned. That is it, right? Black just is running out of moves. In the next position, it is black to play. In such positions, when the situation is close, there are no immediate ideas on how to attack anything, it's very hard to come up with a plan. But there is a simple and helpful idea. Attack in the direction of your pawn chain. Now, a couple little notes. First off, we're talking about closed positions with pawn chains. And when talking about the pawn chain, we're talking about the pawn chain in the middle of the board. Now, with those caveats, you can see that that pawn chain points towards the king side, which means that that is where black should attack. You should be thinking about making moves in that direction. Maybe jump with your knight forward. Maybe reroute the other knight there. Maybe push the pawn forward and expand there on the king side. Why is that the case? Thanks to your pawn chain, it kind of gives you more space on that side of the board and makes it easier for you to bring more pieces, which is the required prerequisite for you to begin your attack later. Now, guess what people play here in most cases? In reality, they do right the opposite. They play pawn c6, which is actually the area of the board where white should be attacking because of their central pawn chain pointing there. Now, what is the problem with that? So let's continue. Now, if you look at this position, you can notice that all these squares are under white's control. Basically, white controls this whole area of the board, which means that within a couple next moves, white will bring more and more pieces into that area. Black won't be able to do that, and they'll collapse. And the irony of the situation is that black accelerated that collapse by their own moves. Endgames is another challenging part of the game, and here are a couple rules which might help. First off, a protected passed pawn is a permanent advantage. In this position, there's this tension, and it might be tempting to trade or to defend your pawn, but the right move, the only winning move, is the move pawn b5. And at first, it does not seem like a big accomplishment for white, but it is, because we got this passed pawn, and what's important, it is protected, meaning black can never capture it, and black cannot do anything to change the situation. And if you think about following moves, white can easily go towards this pawn, capture it, then return back, while black is totally hopeless. He has to guard this passer all the time. He can't ever move in any other direction because as soon as he moves away, this pawn is gonna be promoted. Which means that black will have to get stuck right there, keeping his king just to blockade the pawn, and white can do whatever he wants, grab that pawn, return back to the queen side, and win the game. Somewhere here, right? And of course, if black had more pieces on the board, it might be a little bit easier, but in the core, the situation would remain to be the same. Black would have to keep one of his pieces just to blockade this pawn, and white will outnumber him on the other side of the board. Here's another helpful tip for an endgame: cut off your opponent's king. It makes it a lot easier for you. You can actually pre-move your following moves, and it helps you either when you wish to attack your opponent's king, or when you simply want to restrict your opponent's king. In this position, white's only winning move is rook to f2 to cut off the black king. It is not very intuitive to play that move because at first when you look at this position, you see that you've got these extra pawns going that way, and you think, okay, I'm going to need to just move my king forward and push that pawn and try to win that way. But the problem is black is going to bring his king right here and will easily draw the game because the pawn will be blockaded. Therefore, in order to stop that, you need to cut the king off. You don't gotta play rook f2. Now the king is totally useless. It can never come closer to the pawn. And after that, you can indeed start pushing your passed pawn forward and win the game easily. And if you want to know the simplest chess strategy to play consistently well, check out this video and I'll talk to you soon.